1 o'clock in the UK. Not that I'm there, I'm in Spain, but hopefully you are watching from the area. And it's live at lunch. I'm back. It's been a while for those of you who've noticed. Lots to tell you about, lots to fill you in on. But the good news is I'm back. And this time I'm not going to be alone. I will be alone today. But in the months ahead, get excited because we have got a bunch of incredible food freedom aligned coaches and therapists and professionals coming in to help build on this world of freedom and this journey of freedom. Because as you change your relationship with food, as you reconnect with that wonderful body of yours and start eating normally again, what you find as you do that is the healing journey requires of us, requires of you, that there are things that you'll need to work on and change. And while I rate myself as a coach, I know that this work is best done with other people who can bring their nuanced experience and professionalism to the party. And why not begin bringing them into these conversations around food and that healing journey so that you can benefit from it. If you're watching me live, please feel free at any time to comment. I'll do my best to respond to your questions if you pop questions in the chat. But it's just lovely to have you here. And if you want to share something that's come up for you or you have a question, then please go ahead. That's what I'm here for. So if you're just joining me and you've just discovered this video, my name's Helen. I'm a coach who helps people break free of often decades of emotional eating, yo-yo dieting, and body shame. And today I thought, well, I've been gone for a while. I'm back doing lives. Why don't we start at the beginning with one of the core questions I get when I meet somebody for the first time. It's something like, Helen, I want to be able to eat when I'm hungry because they'll often have heard of me talking about it. And I want to be able to reconnect with my body the way you talk about, but I'm petrified because I just can't trust my hunger because every time I try and eat when I'm hungry, I end up just completely losing control. And I get that. I've absolutely been there. In fact, hunger used to really scare me. In fact, I had a weird relationship with hunger, and maybe you can relate, where on one hand, I was thrilled that it was there because in my mind, it meant I would stay skinny or I was losing weight because that was my obsession at the time. But on the other hand, I was fearful because I knew the minute I began to eat, I could put myself in danger of going to the point of binging and massive discomfort and all the shame and the guilt that went with it. So you may not feel that same level of fear around hunger, but I bet some of that resonates with you, and certainly the fear of losing control if you listen. So let's talk a bit about why we've lost trust with our hunger. And then we'll take a moment to, and I think this is going to be more important, dive into what to do to rebuild that trust again. Why did we lose touch with our hunger or trust with our hunger? Well, if you know anything about the work that I do, you'll know there's really 5 reasons that we overeat, but there's only one that has messed with our hunger. There's only one reason that I've ever discovered, aside from some really rare potential genetic differentiation or hormonal distinct differences that somebody might show up with. But most people fall into the genetic range where they're quite capable and used to be able to be quite capable of listening to their hunger. So where did it all go wrong? How did we become afraid of it? How did we lose trust? Well, there's only one reason that I've found. And it's really simple, and you're going to hear me talk about it ad infinitum, and you're going to want to shoot yourself from boredom when you hear me talk about it so much. But it's really this. It's the moment we began restricting our calories to the point at which our bodies felt threatened. So restriction, restriction, restriction. We call it these days caloric deficit. In the past, we used to call it dieting, whatever you want to call it. As soon as you're undernourishing and underfeeding that wonderful body of yours, and the minute that starts, you put yourself in danger of tipping into, in the future, loss of control eating. It might show up as mindless snacking. It might show up as complete blowout binges. But either way, it's those moments when you can see what you're doing, you know what you're doing, and yet you keep going anyway. But it doesn't just show up as loss of control. It also shows up as obsession. We might call it food noise, the constant thinking about, worrying about food. It's always on your mind. You're fearful of the next bite. You're afraid, you're upset about the bites you've had before, the meals you've had before. And when people meet me for the first time, what a phrase I often hear them use, and maybe you relate, is it's a constant obsession. It's all consuming. I love that because we're talking about eating and we use phrases like it's all consuming. So caloric restriction, calorie deficit, diets, whatever you want to call them, are predictive of loss of control eating. And this is something the diet industry just does not talk about. When we're struggling to uh, restrict our caloric intake, it always looks like it's a problem of willpower. And then when we find ourselves in a place of loss of control, at no point does the diet industry say, oh, hands up, actually, that's one of the side effects that might be possible from this process of caloric deficit or caloric restriction. They just go, no, well, that's on you. You just didn't follow the program. You must be lazy. You don't have enough willpower. You need to try harder. And what I'm here to tell you today is your hunger is appropriate. It always has been. And as soon as you overly limit what you bring into that wonderful body of yours, your body goes into survival mode. Of course it will. It must. It's got to get you to eat. And the way it gets you to eat is to get you focusing on it and thinking about it a lot, which is why we see, even in periods where people are in positions where they're not deliberately restricting their calories, maybe it's war or there's some kind of famine, the food noise dials right up. And we've seen this in experiment after experiment. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter male or female. I imagine it doesn't matter species, because I know there's a lot of this, not that they can read the minds of rats, but we see rats who've had caloric restriction will start losing control and overcompensating. So don't worry, all of us do it. We're designed to be hyper attuned and thinking about food so that when it's available again, we will get it into our system. And so on a very simple level, diets lead us into overcompensation, to overeating, which is so sad, because the very thing you're trying to do, to eat less, is the thing you start doing, not because you're broken, not because you're lacking in willpower, but just because of a very primal mechanism that forces your body to become obsessed with food, to think about food, and eventually to get you to eat that food in a kind of overcompensatory way. And so what we think of lack of trust with our hunger is actually our body trying to keep us alive, trying to save us. And this is when we see, and you'll see this in the latest Netflix documentary about The Biggest Loser, when people lose a lot of weight very fast. I mean, willpower can get us an awfully long way, and most of us have had an experience of that. But ultimately, when we go too aggressively, too fast in a way that doesn't feel safe for the body, and it's wired with hormones that knows when this is going too fast, then we might tip ourselves into a kind of aggressive overcompensatory response. And it's not broken. It's completely understandable. In fact, if anything, it's your body doing exactly the right thing. So when somebody reaches out to me, they've been out of control, they're feeling the hopelessness and despair because they've spent years of eating on their hunger and then overeating, and then they feel the guilt and shame. How do we repair that? How do we rebuild that trust? And the answer is, well, it's not easy, because you've got to be brave and take risks. You've got to be able to listen to your hunger again. You've got to allow yourself to eat, and then you've got to stay present and see if you can notice when you've had enough. And because you've had so many repetitions of going beyond, that habit loop is already set up, that almost fear response and that survival, that primal eating response is set up now. And so it takes a lot of awareness and patience as you try. Sometimes you get it right, feels great, you're satisfied, but you didn't eat too much. Sometimes you don't, and you go beyond, and then you've got to do the work of forgiving yourself. But ultimately, it begins with a period of reconnecting with that incredible body of yours, actually hearing what is real hunger, not cravings, not non-hunger urges to eat. That's all the other work we do. But can I actually hear my hunger? Do I know what that actually physically feels like? And what do I, and then how do I build the trust when I allow myself to eat, to actually then not lose control? And the only way to do that is through lots of trial and error. I've just seen a question come in. How exciting! Do you think a bad relationship with food only stems from restrictive eating? Whoa, okay. I'm going to answer this question. It's come at such a good time. And then what we'll do, and don't let me forget to do this, we're going to wrap up with what to do to rebuild the trust, because that's a nice simple one. And I've got a training for you, which I've linked to in the description below, that you can watch to begin rebuilding this trust. So do you think a bad relationship with food only stems from restrictive eating? I think the short answer is yes. I'm going to have to think about this a little bit more carefully, although, of course, what we want to acknowledge is it also stems from media, family, belief systems that we've grown up in, including the belief system that our body wasn't enough just as it was, right? I mean, if we thought our body was fine just as it was, and all of us, I think, have had photographs of ourselves where we were actually fine, but we came to believe we needed to start restricting. Now, we've come to believe that from society, from our parents, from our siblings, from our friends, from media. So could we blame media for our bad relationship with food? Yeah. And it led us to the restriction, which leads to the loss of control. So I hope I've answered that question, but I think ultimately whatever we do, we're rooting it back to the loss of trust with our hunger generally roots back to restriction. And as I say that, I think to myself, could it be the other thing? So I usually work through 4 different areas that usually lead people to overeating. The one is this restrictive piece. Let's heal that dieting mindset. Let's practice listening to your tummy again so that you can rebuild that trust and learn to hear satiety. Not just hunger, but can you start to hear satiety? Well, how does that show up for you? And can you get really good at putting the knife and fork down at that point? It all takes a lot of practice, but you can. And boy, it feels good. So you want to do it more. But there's these 4 other areas that might be creating a bad relationship with food or lead to a bad relationship or fearful relationship with food. The one is our negative thinking. So that sort of ties into the beliefs, but it also ties into the thoughts we have about ourselves, which end up have us reaching for food as a way to escape those horrible thoughts. And because we've used food as a way to medicate our thoughts or our emotions, that's the third one, we generally then demonize food again. We think it's the food's fault. But actually, it's more the relationship we have with food. And what I often people ask me, but what about addictive food? We've heard food's addictive. What about ultra processed food? And I'm not the coach who's going to sit here and say ultra processed food isn't more palatable. I'm not the coach who is going to sit here and say you're not more likely to reach for ultra processed or junk food or whatever the case may be in that space of thinking negative thoughts or having uncomfortable emotions. Yes, you will. But again, I don't want to demonize the food, because what happens as we do this work is we discover that actually when we pair the ability to connect with our body to the other work that we do around emotional eating and critical self-talk that can lead to overeating. And the fourth one there was getting the rest you need. If we're doing all of that, then like magic, those foods that we thought were so addictive that we've demonized and labeled bad, that we've blamed for our bad relationship with food, turn out to be fine. And we can have just a bite of them and stop. So it's a process. But what an incredible question, because that bad relationship with food can be really multifaceted, and it can come from so many things. But oftentimes when we root it back, the original loss of control, the bad relationship with our hunger comes from restrictive eating. Thanks for the question, Meg. I hope I answered it effectively. So let's wrap this up with bringing it back to what do we do now? We know we've got a bad relationship with food. We know we've lost that trust we have with our hunger. Now what? Brilliant. Well, the first thing we've got to do is get you tuned in. And that can feel very scary if that feeling of hunger has been something we feared. But also because we live in a world where we're so brain heavy and logical, our brain has a habit of getting in the way. So the first thing I do with every single person that I work with, regardless of what level of restriction they've come from, regardless, even if they've never been on a diet before, we want to see, hey, can you get a good reading from your body in terms of your hunger? Because if you can get that, then we can work out what all the non-hunger's about. So this conversation has been about hunger. Of course, there's lots of conversation to be had about non-hunger eating for critical self-talk, emotions, exhaustion, etc. But when we can get really good at that reading, then everything gets easier. And I teach something called a tummy check-in. When I first teach it with somebody, it takes about 15 minutes. We do it slowly. We sort of reconnect with the body a bit first, and then we go into the tummy. We get that little reading. We find out what our hunger is actually asking us for. Are we hungry at all? And if we are, what does our body want? Not does our mind think we should have, but what does our body actually want? And it delights and surprises most people to find that actually they can get a pretty good reading from their tummy. This thing that they thought they'd lost contact with. And better than that, what we find usually, not every time, but usually when we first do a tummy check-in the right way, your tummy is usually asking you for, ironically, these really healthful foods, the kind of foods that you might have even eaten on that diet. And when people start to see that, it's the beginning of rebuilding the trust. Because if my body's just told me what to eat, and it was something that actually is really helpful, all things considered, we start to think, oh, actually, I can trust this hunger of mine after all. So I can't go into the tummy check-in with you now, it would take too long, but in the description below, you find a link to sign up to a new newsletter that myself and my team are creating. We're doing it every couple of weeks now, and we're just going to give you a quick little bite-sized flavor of nutritional food freedom goodness for you to have a little chew on and think about. Sometimes there'll be training, sometimes it'll just be a quote of the day or whatever it might be. So we're not going to bombard your emails with non-stop emails. But if you'd like to sign up for that, when you do, you get the full tummy check-in training. Takes you about 20 minutes to go through, but once you've done it once, you'll be able to start practicing the skill of connecting and listening to your hunger again. And if you start practicing that, 80% of this work of healing your relationship with food is in the bag. And then we've got these other things to work on. So it's particularly if you've been a big time dieter in your whole life. So click on the link, get that training. If you want to unsubscribe after that, you can do it. But that's the beginning of really changing and healing your relationship with food. It's brilliant to be back with you. I'm sorry I started a bit late. It was a bit of a bumpy ride getting the stream going again. But we're back. If you want to bring your questions, your aha moments, whatever it is, to the party, please come and join me in 2 weeks' time. We'll be doing it every second Wednesday. And as soon as we can, we're going to get a few more food freedom coaches on board in the live, and we'll dive into some cool, juicy topics. And you can throw us all of your questions in the chat, and we'll be here to support you on your freedom journey. So onwards and upwards, lovely ones. Have a beautiful Wednesday and a wonderful week further. And of course, as always, if you watch any of this and you think, man, that was awesome, smash the like button. And if you really think it was awesome, subscribe to the channel. That would be wonderful. And of course, if anybody wants to work with me privately or find out about the Food Freedom Foundation's program, don't hesitate to get in touch. The links are all going to be in the description. All right, lovelies, have a beautiful day further. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.